Big intro, very kind of you, Simon. Nice to see you all today, and good to be back actually here in the BT Tower. Thank you very much, Simon Godfrey and BT, for hosting us here in the tower. I think as we're here to talk about very exciting things, we've come in at the kind of ground level. I'm hoping that metaphorically, at least over the course of the day, we're going to rise up to the top of this tower and enjoy the view from there. Anyway, well, perhaps that'll be next year's conference. I also want to thank Simon and Reform for choosing this as the topic, because I think Reform, like other think tanks interested in government, have done a lot of great diagnostic reports in the last year or so. This, I think, is critical to the solution set, and I think is the single most promising area around the use of data and technology, focusing on customers. That's the thing that's going to transform things more than anything else. Probably many of you think that is also the case, which is why you're here, but I do look forward to some contrary views as well, and after a few initial remarks, we're going to have some Q&A. Great, so let me start just with the case for reform, and you might think that in a kind of organisation called Reform, it isn't very necessary to make that case, but nevertheless, I think it's useful just to ground us in the welcome Daljit, who's on the panel next. I've got various other data experts across government, so don't worry. Anything that I get wrong, they're going to tidy up and correct after I've gone, so that'll be very discreet. But look, so the first slide I wanted to share with you is just because I know you're talking about the future of health this afternoon. And this is data up to 2021, but it basically shows GDP data against healthcare data. And what you can see is that we're spending a lot more on healthcare than our GDP is going up. And if you round those slides, that data forward a couple of years, that gap between the amount we're spending on health and the amount we're increasing our overall wealth is increasing further. So that is one very important, substantial reason why we've got a bit of a problem with our productivity and the sustainability of our systems. Another way of looking at that would be if you regarded debt interest as a department to be a really fun department to work in, then it would be the third biggest department now after DWP and DHSE. So bigger than all the money we spend on education and defence and other active transport as well, is what we spend just servicing the debt from money we've already spent. Again, on healthcare, I suppose, as well as the cost of healthcare and the sustainability of that, it doesn't seem to be going particularly well. And obviously, there are very good explanations and indeed excuses, if you prefer, available for that in terms of the incredible impact of COVID. But nevertheless, just as an experience for our fellow citizens, for many of us, for friends and family as well, the extent of those backlogs, those growing backlogs, is a kind of like a super urgent problematic issue. And that's also just reflected in the level of satisfaction that people are showing at the moment, or dissatisfaction in a way. So looking at the sort of wider case for reform then, that can also be expressed in the level of demand for services the state provides, of which universal credit is a good example. Again, big increase there. A very, very important point, and possibly underappreciated outside the specialised world of policy wonkery, which I regard this as a good group today for that. But I don't think it's a big part of our national debate yet, or generally understood, but the extent at which, having had the benefits over recent years of having quite a young population, relatively speaking, compared to other advanced countries, that's beginning to shift quite dramatically. If you look over the next 20-year period, the sort of dark blue bit, you can't read the slide from where you are on the right, those are ones where it's 40 to 50% of the population is over the age of 65. Now, I know that 65 is the new 55 or 45, etc., but nevertheless, you do get a picture that a lot of people will be depending on public services and also may not be contributing as much, if at all, to the workforce. So that is a big difference. Also, see the very strong geographical dimensions to that. There'll be parts of the country where over half of the population are over the age of 65. Then looking at what we can do with sort of the potential of technology, again, just a thing always I try and kind of ground this in, and is that in government, unlike in business, even a business like BT, we don't get to choose our customers. We have to deal with all of the citizens as we find. So we can take a technology approach, such as some of the companies do sometimes, and we trialed something, you saw HMRC, seasonal self-assessment helpline trial. What does that mean? The phones were closed for a period, right? A few months. So how well did that go down? That was the Sun's reaction to it. And again, it's just a sort of, a reminder not about the way the Sun is, but actually the way that we are as a population, that we do something which actually lowers cost, and it's incredibly expensive and not very satisfying to be phoning in your HMRC complaint, and much better if you identify yourself digitally and you get a much better service, etc., etc. But if you try and just sort of switch that off or force people into the digital channel, then you do tend to get a bit of a blowback reaction. So those are some of the negatives. Let me try and give you some of the positives, which are actually legion, in a way, even greater. And that's, I think you said that I had venerated data, which I think is a nice concept in a way. Possibly I have, and that's because the importance I attach to this as being one of our, well, in fact, our single best way forward in terms of productivity and performance of public services. And Simon, you also said, like, the revolution is happening. It's not something we're just waiting. It's not just a theoretical type thing. And I really agree with that. And one of the ways we set out to try and kind of accelerate that was a year and a half ago now. We went through all the services that are provided by government, and we got to 7,500, and we got tired of counting. But then we took the top 1% of those by more or less by volume of transactions, but also attaching a little bit of importance to value, numerical, and also the impact on people's lives. So the top 1% of those, 75, and said, look, if we could actually make those really great services, that would have a huge impact on people's experience of the state, of public services, and of course in the process, by making them great, reducing the error rate, improving throughput, that would also lower the cost to serve, and incidentally, but also greatly improve the working life of people trying to administer those services, less complaints from customers, higher value-added work. So that was our kind of target for that, and I'll describe in a moment where we've got to with that. The value of that is quite significant, and it comes from, it's about 365 million, quite conservatively counted a year. And that's just saving, direct government expenditure through channel shift, through improved case management and paper processing being replaced by digital work. But that's just with today's technology and a very conservative saving, and that's only the saving to the state. So the savings to citizens, which are kind of an economic rather than a financial calculation, that's 2 or 3 times the amount of that, and every year. And that's just what we're doing now. Nothing exciting or dramatic or high-tech about it. Switch over to the right-hand side of that slide, and you could see, well, again, we did some analysis of the types of work which, by comparison with other parts of the economy in other countries, lend themselves to AI-based productivity transformation. And in our calculations, that figure is up to about 5 billion, particularly for big operational departments. Again, you'll be hearing from colleagues from DWP and HMRC, so I won't steal their thunder, but it's those are areas where, I suppose in a way, currently there are tens of thousands of people engaged in quite low-level admin work, mostly dealing with individual demands for case or calculations on tax, case management type work for benefits and tax, health assessments and so on. And all of those things will lend themselves very much to the use of AI to greatly improve the productivity of that process, so that the compilation of relevant data, the comparison of that with a pre-described kind of code of scoring will enable the decision maker, which I'm sure they will say will still be human, to be much more efficient in that. And that would be great for everybody. So I think there's huge, huge benefits there. And obviously, I'm talking a bit there about parts of the civil service, but the civil service, as you probably know, is about 500,000 people. 5 million people work in public services. Those same potential you get for teachers and GPs. And if you talk to any of them, I'm sure you will know lots of them, they all say, my life is weighed down with admin. That really shouldn't be necessary. We should take away that. We've got highly trained people working in hospitals and schools and places we want the admin to be done more and more by machines so they can focus on the work they actually need and want to do. Great, so just, sometimes people say, that's great, can we just have it now? And that would be terrific, but obviously there are lots of different elements to actually enabling the AI revolution to be a realistic prospect. I think the first of those is that government is the kind of like the original brownfield site. We don't have brand new kit we can just build everywhere. We've got a lot of existing kit that has enormous terabytes of data on, and also customers hanging of it and people who are trained to use with those things, and a lot of interrelationship between those systems. So as a result, one of the most important things we can do is actually to remediate those legacy systems. And one of the best things that I'm most proud of actually over the last 3 years is that after years of government sort of saying we want to deal with the legacy and getting money for it, sometimes the Treasury and then not actually dealing with that and not succeeding in moving to the cloud, we've really turned the corner there in the last 3 years. And all of the top, I think it's about 160 different top legacy systems across government all have a funded and carefully planned out remediation plan for them. And we've also published a lot of the data on that, which has been assessed by the NAO and Public Accounts Committee, who said this is a pretty good plan and you're actually on course with it. And we can see lots and lots of those old legacy systems being retired and new ones being put in place. And they are lower cost, much more resilient, much better to work with, and also create basically a much better environment in which new technology, AI's technology and others can be introduced. So that's, I think, a really important aspect of it. I've spoken already about the Top 75 Services program. We started off, I think, with 9 services at grade. We've now got to 15, and our plan is to get to 50 by June 25. And again, we've got pretty good detailed plans for each department and each service to do that. And I also think it's quite a good process to kind of, at the beginning of it, we did find that, and those of you not familiar with government may be shocked by this, that there wasn't a single service owner for some of those services. And also the answer to the question of what's your cost to serve was, don't know, I'll get back to you on that. And it took quite a while to get back to us on that, but we now do have a cost to serve for each one of those 75 services and a single service owner. And those are core elements with it, plus, as I say, a plan of what it takes to get to great. So I think that is really important and necessary. And then you've got lots of data gurus coming after you, including our Chief Data Officer, Sue Bateman, so I won't go to town on the data connectivity, but again, everybody in this room, I'm sure, will understand that if you don't have digital data, you can't do any of this, and the data needs to be in reasonable shape. I say only reasonable because when I started off, which as you can probably tell wasn't yesterday in the world of data, maybe about 30 years ago, you actually, in those days, people said, gosh, you need data to be clean and structured. That is less and less important now, and that's a really good thing because government was never going to get round to that, not properly. So it's great that technology has made that less necessary, but it still needs a high level of connectivity. And we're putting in place huge numbers of these APIs, 260 or so, and they are beginning to change things in ways I will illustrate in a second. So just around the sort of practical aspect of how we're changing the experience of government and how we did that. We've got a service we call One Login, which is a nice kind of Ronson-style name, because you used to be able to have to access gov.uk and other government services using one of 100 different registration systems, and each time it would say, who are you? I have no idea. Let me start again. And all the details about your address, your date of birth, etc., would all have to be re-entered. So now we say to people, look, do that once and you can use that again if you choose to do so. And a lot of people are choosing to do so, about 3 million so far. We think that's going to get to about 30 million over the next year because we've got the big departments, DWP and HMRC, coming onto that service. They've already used it in some parts of their service array, but now we'll be doing it right across the piece. So that will make a huge difference. It takes a lot of the hassle out of accessing government services for citizens. It also, over time, will enable citizens to be able to get more tailored, ultimately customized services, more related to different stages in their life. We have one now, a well-known one called Tell Us Once, which means that when you suffer the death of a relative, then all the different parts of the government system that need to know that can be told. But we would like that type of thing to happen also to when you have a child, when you get married, when you move house, all the other different things, when you take up new education, et cetera, when you get a new job, when you lose a job, all of these things, rather than having to kind of re-describe yourself in all of those ways to government, you would be able to move more to a system of tell us once. And what's more, we'd be more attentive to your needs and be able to say, gosh, at this stage in your life with that kind of event, you might need this. Imagine that at the moment, government basically is very reactive. People come to it, ask for service, so we try and provide that service, knowing relatively little about them. This will enable a much more tailored service, which will be worth a lot and enable us also to much more quickly target and refine what we do. So I'm very positive about One Login, because without a digital identity system that's robust and scalable, it's very hard to bring about the level of digital government that we want. Universal credit, again, I talked about it before in terms of, gosh, look at the increased demand, but another way of looking at it actually is the increased efficiency. It is basically a digital system, and that was very important. Going back to the early days of lockdown, if you're watching the COVID inquiry show, you'd think that it was all people sending rude messages to each other, but there were also quite a lot of really essential work being done across government, and in DW people, they weren't sending rude messages to each other. They were dealing, I think, for one evening with 156,000 additional requests for benefit, which they were able to process in the pre-universal credit world, because that's a digital system. That would have taken weeks and weeks, and people who depended on that benefit to be able to live would not have got it. So very, very effective and important example of the move to a digital system. But it's also there in the cost to serve, which again I emphasize as it should be a key metric for all government work. And if you look at the number of cases a case manager can handle a month, and also the overall cost of the system, that's been improving quite dramatically, about 30% per annum falls, and that's saved so far £500 million, because this is a big old system, so if you make those kind of level of increases, huge gains will come. So that, I think, is a very positive story. It's been a long time getting there. Some people who will remember universal credit was pretty painful in the first years, but has ended up as a success story in government. And again, sticking with something over time is, again, probably a key success factor for these big digital programs. Also, I mentioned just APIs. I think it's 250 or so APIs that we've are using right across government to enable data transfer. If you think about what that means in practice, so if you go to a pharmacy, I'm sure everyone goes to a pharmacy from time to time. If you need to get prescription data, then the question is, are you registered? Are you entitled to get this on prescription? And that's something which used to be a kind of a variety of different ways of trying to get hold of that data, quite high cost to the NHS and to the pharmacy network. That is now all done for an API, and I think something like 500,000 of those are accessed a month, that kind of a figure. So, a huge improvement in the efficiency of the machine that happens really with a minimal of human intervention. Great. So those are some of the big practical benefits. Just thinking about some of the more exciting kind of developments. Civil Service Data Challenge. Anyone compete in the Civil Service Data Challenge? I bet there are some civil service room. Yes, there is one. I knew that would happen. Great. So again, 3 years ago, we thought, right, it's not. We know there's great ingenuity across the civil service. There's all kinds of people with innovative ideas. We wanted to encourage them to come forward. We launched the Data Challenge. We got over 100 great entries. And we ran it again the year after. So just to mention the two winners, actually all the underbidders were great as well, but someone's got to win, and they were particularly exciting. And a nice illustration, I think, of what you can do today with technology to deal with very serious issues. So the first one is kind of peatland, and I don't know whether, it's probably a well-known thing that peatland is actually responsible for quite a lot of our CO2 emissions, because basically it's drying out, and the rate at which it dries out is a terrific repository of CO2. As it dries out, CO2 gets released. That is causing about 20 million tons of CO2 a year to go out, which is 3% of all our emissions, and happening without anyone doing anything about it. So obviously the challenge is to say, right, well, why is it drying out? And the main reason for that is because it's been drained, and it's been drained in some cases hundreds of years ago with these moorland drains where to enable a kind of farming to take place there. These days, we actually don't want to do farming in those areas. We've got a better place to farm, and we don't need to, preserve our moorlands. So how do we re-wet them? We need to block the drains. Where are the drains? That was the challenge. And they used to send out people from natural England on long, with anoraks and coats for long walks. It's probably a lovely activity. It was quite an efficient way of trying to find the old drains, and actually they're really hard to work out because they're hundreds of years old. So could technology help? Well, yes. Ordnance Survey do flyovers using these little planes. So they've got masses and masses of digital photographs of what of the lie of the land. That was all fed into a computer system, and then using generative AI to test the kind of the plausibility of different hypotheses about which of those showed an indication of where a drain might be. They trained it up, it got better and better. Now they can identify not only where the drains are, but also which are the ones that are going to be easiest to refill, and what the impact that will be in terms of cutting the emissions. So, it's an intriguing example. You might think that was kind of an old problem which has been almost untreatable, which now, using technology, we can solve very efficiently. The other one I wanted to go to town on a bit was just this year's winner, because again, I think it's very exciting. So you won't find anybody anywhere who doesn't think that tackling modern slavery is a good thing to do, but it's also a very hard thing to do by definition, because you don't know where the people are. You know that people have been illegally brought into the country and are working in terrible conditions, effectively like a kind of medieval bondage for somebody who arranged their passage. You don't know where they are, and obviously they got no means of telling you. They don't exist on any state records, and the people who've done that have every reason to conceal that. So it's a hard job to try and identify them. Could data help? Well, so again, the Home Office worked with HMRC, DWP, and the police, and they found out that by putting lots and lots of data together into kind of a hopper, they could be able to look for patterns to identify where you might find victims of modern slavery. And I remember one of the best things they told me the way they found that was that their theory was that a lot of people work in the food sector, food preparation sector. And they had evidence from previous cases of that. So then they said, right, well, might it be that the standards of food preparation being done by those companies, if they're behaving that badly in this area, they might be behaving badly in another area. And it turned out that was actually a very good theory, and that by looking at where there were outbreaks of food poisoning at a local district area, they could then follow that to where it came from, and they did a number of raids and found out that's where people had people locked up in vans out the back. So things like that. Just use an example again, very human example. I think like a scourge of our times, modern slavery, and again, data is the key to being able to solve that. So it's very exciting. So last things, just in terms of kind of like how we scale this up. I think these are all parts of the kind of published plans on implementing the roadmap, taking the next step in terms of further development and infrastructure. I haven't really talked as much about skills and capability, but you obviously all know that's incredibly important. I haven't also talked so far, I'll maybe bring it out a bit if you like in the Q&A, about how we're incredibly conscious about, if you like, this sort of sacred trust that there exists around data. If you abuse that data, if you ask for it for this reason and use it for that purpose, if you allow it to leak out into the public, if you sell it off to somebody without people's permission, etc., all of that destroys public trust, and that holds back this terrific future that we want to bring into existence. I think that's very important as well. And then finally, just I hope, by the way, you've been enjoying some of these pictures that come with these slides. They're all generated by AI, you probably guessed. So when I've been looking for kind of flyovers over peatland or kind of this one here, in fact, is because, as a reminder, I know you talk about healthcare, and 4 years ago I was out in Boston, MIT, and I met with a doctor there, or a surgeon actually, in ophthalmology, and he was able to show me then that they had, through machine learning, they taught a machine to be able to identify very early cases of cancer and other infections in the eye, so they'd know whether to operate or not. And the failure to operate was often disastrous and led to loss of sight. Equally, if you operate in someone's eye unnecessarily, people are very unhappy about that. So having a very solid basis for the decision whether to operate or not was crucial, and hundreds of thousands of images of healthy and unhealthy eyes were loaded up. And after a bit, the computer started spotting things that we didn't even know existed. For example, male versus female eyes. Up until that time, they thought they were the same, but the computer was able to spot patterns that we could not see and couldn't even explain or understand. But they were right every time, so it was an interesting finding. And so I thought, gosh, this is MIT. Why can't we have that in Britain? But actually, we do now have that. The Moorfields Eye Centre. 4 years later, the PM spoke about it in his speech about AI just the other day. So things which were at the cutting edge in a high-tech university now being deployed in an NHS hospital. And again, that is a very important part of this for me, because it talks about the democratization of these opportunities. That's something that was in a lab or only for a person paying top quality private healthcare in the US is now something that you can access through the NHS and indeed soon in other countries too. So that is a really positive story. And my final slides are a busy one. I'll just describe very quickly what it is. It's pretty well-known data, I guess, so it won't take long, which is that you won't be able to see on the left, but that's just transistor count. So, it was 2,000 back in 1970. End of 20, the number of transistors on a chip was up to 40 billion. I think the new NVIDIA Hopper H100 has 80 billion transistors on a chip. So I suppose, in a way, the numbers are just mind-boggling, and it's very exciting, the technology required to be actually doing that. But I suppose the point of the map is just, it doesn't look like it's running out of steam, does it? Like it's got, I don't know how, but somehow we seem to get more and more stuff onto it. It's still working for us. And then again, on that sense of kind of almost accelerating opportunity over on the right, which is that, again, well-known kind of adoption chart type data. How many days does it take? Something really popular, I don't know, you can see sort of, Twitter or something there. What was that? 2,000 days in order to get to 100 million users, and what was it about? 1,000 or so is that to get to 1 million. And if you look at ChatGPT over on the left, it's just practically vertical. It's just unbelievable, the take-up. And again, that is telling us something very important about the future. Exactly what it will mean, we will find out over the course of today. Right, great. Over to Q&A.
Yeah, I've got a thumbs up over there. Helpful. There's a social citizen in every crowd who gives a thumb up when you ask that question. You, sir, have been that for me. Thank you so much for your presentation, Alex. I'm going to probe with one question before going to a Q&A. So if you have a burning question, please get it ready. And that's to pick up on something you were talking about. Oh, there it is. That's to pick up on something you were talking about just towards the end there, which is to do with the capabilities and the skills side of things. Obviously a massive consideration for someone in your role. In some ways, we're at the perfect moment to ask you questions like these as you're looking towards the end of your tenure as the COO of the civil service. I'm interested in, and something we've talked a lot about as a think tank, I'm interested in the sources of resistance within organizations to some of the approaches that you've been talking about. The resistance that's still in place, but also clearly some of the resistance that you and others with you have been able to start to overcome. So I was wondering if you had any kind of reflections on the way to do that and where that sort of mindset shift needs to come from.
Yeah, great. Very good question. Let me try and answer it in a few ways. I think, first of all, it would be wrong of me not to highlight that we have just launched an AI incubator just yesterday. In the Cabinet Office for people with extraordinary AI skills. That is part of it, but only a small part of what we need to do. I recognize, having worked in startups myself, that sometimes a small number of people with very high level of skills can make a disproportionate impact. But that is part of the solution to government, but only a small part. A much bigger thing is actually just the number of people with digital and data skills across the system as a whole. And over the last year, that increased by nearly 10,000, which is a remarkable level of increase, and that is right across the board. Every department, every public body are having to take on more people with digital and data skills. And some of those are people who have switched from not having those skills to moving into it from elsewhere in public service or service. So that is incredibly important. I'm also very conscious of how it's not something where you only have the digital and data people who need to know about this. You've got a much bigger group of people, including senior leaders, people like myself, who've got some control over what the organization focuses on, the movement of resources, etc., like that, what gets evaluated and rewarded. We've got to understand that potential as well. So trying to make sure that that is, people understand the world of data enough to be able to really seize it. They don't have to be, all have to be great experts. Not everyone needs to teach themselves Python in the evening, although some people I know are doing that at the moment. But everyone needs to understand the extent of that potential. And we launched last summer One Big Thing, which is a big data training kind of thing across the whole of government. And so far, a quarter of all the people working in the civil service have registered to do that. So that's really good. So it's like a real movement. It's not something just for an elite group or kind of people who are already very good at data. It's for people to understand about that world of data. And a lot of those people will be working in, say it again, the big operational departments that are coming here. And it's not just, you've got the kind of the tech leaders here today, but in a way it's as important that the operational service leaders in DWP and HMRC and Home Office, that they are also fully trained. So that is the beginning of the answer to your very important question about capability and skills.
Thank you so much. All right, let's take it straight to the audience. This is obviously a group which does not have any kind of challenges summoning the capabilities and the skills, so it's a slightly biased sample, but I've already got 2 hands up and I have some colleagues with microphones. Let's go to the man standing at the back to start with, please. I'll take a set of 2 questions and maybe we'll get a few rounds of that. Gentleman at the back. Thank you, Manisha.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Devon. I run policy and practice, but I also worked on universal credit back when it was originally being developed. And one of the things we call for is enabling better use of universal credit data across government and across departments. And it's really interesting in the context of a cost of living crisis, identifying people, as you were saying in a few of your examples, who most need that support. And we're doing a lot of that with local authorities, where I think there's a lot more scope for innovation. But I guess what we see is 2 problems in central government. One is just generally it's understandably more risk averse. It's one big department as opposed to kind of lots of smaller local authorities. So I think that you're overcoming that. And then secondly, I think it's the level of disparate ownership of data policy. I guess not just policy. I guess you need governance. You need the actual technical data teams as well. And getting everyone around the table when it's probably more a number 15 priority as opposed to a top. Really important across all of those, but number 15 for all of them rather than the most important. Those are the 2 things we see holding back better use of data across government at the moment. I just wondered whether you could comment on that or whether you agree or whether you see it somewhere else. Thanks.
Yes, basically, if I can answer that straight out, I think that's bang on. Those are the key issues. I think that when we sort of started on this drive, say 3.5 years ago, at that time, there was, we looked harder whether the legal inhibitions, the gateways, mostly that isn't a big issue. There are some, but that's not the biggest issue. Sometimes also it's kind of like it's a training or a skills issue like that, again, largely addressed. So I think the biggest issues now are kind of, there is a conservatism about using data, understandably and correctly over kind of personal data and tax data, but we say that doesn't need to stop you sharing data in 9 out of 10 cases, and you can with proper protections. And then, as you say, the much more practical issue is that you've got a lot of people with a lot of different work to do, and their job jar is pretty full, and it's quite low down that this request from another department. So one of the reasons why we've been pushing, and maybe Sue and colleagues will talk about that, for trying to develop this data exchange and also having some funded programs to enable that sharing to occur, is to accelerate that and overcome those kind of inhibitions. And I think that is beginning to happen. I see some really good examples every day. One, in fact, was also a runner-up to the data challenge where, again, just to illustrate very well how we can kind of use these things, if you want to get working credits and you work on a construction site, and you have to fill in at the end of your working week how many hours of work you've done there, And I guess the temptation for all of us in that situation might be to adjust the number of hours a little bit, because it makes quite a difference to how much of a top-up you receive. The way that works now is if you do that and it doesn't match the data that we've got from employer records, which actually was HMRC source data, then it prompts you and says, like, is that your final answer? Because that doesn't match what your employer said. And a surprising number of people then correct that and see, gosh, I made a mistake, and the correct number of hours is. So it's a very nice, I kind of use it as an example, because that is, I think that's HMRC and DWP working together. It was an innovation that came from within the civil service. And also, I think it's quite sympathetic to the way in which we deal in civil society. It doesn't immediately try and arrest somebody, rather the contrary. It says, look, you've made a mistake. Mistakes are made like that. Let me prompt you at a time of your own, just before you complete this, to try and correct for that. So that is the world we're moving into. We want to see more of those cases. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's go for one more question. Yes, gentleman over here in the, I think it's a pink shirt, but it could just be the lighting.
Yeah, pink.
Pink game logo. I'm not here for the sartorial notes. The microphone's just coming, sir. There you go.
Thank you very much, Alistair. I'm conscious in the data economy personalisation is quite a big deal, and you haven't talked about personalisation and its corollaries around targeting and potentially rationing. I'm really interested because that creates some governance challenges: economy, efficiency, targeting, good; rationing, morality, etc., more questionable. How is the governance evolving to be able to do this stuff at pace but do it right?
I touched on it lightly, and I think, the way you put the question, I think, it sets it up nicely as a dilemma. I think if you go back to the very first slide I showed, which is the kind of healthcare picture, you could see that we're going to be needing to target the provision of public services, and there's no question of that. So it's more about, are you able, what's your mechanism for trying as well as possible to provide services to people most in need at a time of the greatest need. And at the moment, we're quite a way off from that. Lots of people receive public benefits who have no great need to it. I'm not saying that they're committing fraud or it's errors, just the system is just a bit scattergun. So being more targeted will be immensely helpful. Equally, I think when people have urgent need for complex situations, and again, there's a long-standing government program which originally was called Troubled Families, which looked at the consequential effects of people across for their lifestyles, for their families, for sometimes related to crime, other demands on the state going forward. Being able to identify those cases early on and make appropriate interventions can make a massively positive effect, both for the individual and, of course, for the cost of services overall. So I think that's the world we're getting into. I think to the point from the previous questioner, a wariness about some of the difficult issues there around governance, about kind of the risk of blowback from angry parts of civil society or from the media about doing that, have probably made people more cautious than they should be. And I think we have to try and find a way to accelerate that, because other types of polling data would show that people absolutely accept the justice of that. In fact, they already think we do a lot more joining up of data than we actually do. And if we don't do that, then the reality is we will be providing less and less good services to people across the country. So that is not a world that any of us want. So responsible targeting with appropriate safeguards is where we need to go. But I think you're going to have a great chance to explore some of this with the next group of speakers, and I've been speaking too long, so my time is up.
I think your time, yes, and you've got a hard out, and I think we should all just please join me in thanking.
Thank you.